This podcast is a proud member of the Unidentified Network.
So now, ladies and gentlemen, live and in colour, it's Mr. Wayne Lovejuice.
The other day I produced a movie, had a chat with an interesting chappie who said that the YouTube algorithm really aren't that happy. If a channel only broadcasts once a week, so we decided we could Xtra. Whenever we've got a piece of news in our new book on the track Xtra.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of On the Track Xtra. But before we start doing what we're going to be doing, or rather what Richard and I are going to be doing, Archibald wants to give us his tribute to a David Bowie album that was released 50 years ago this year.
Fleas the size of rats, sucked on rats the size of cats, and 10,000 peoploids split into small tribes, converting the highest of the sterile skyscrapers, while packs of dogs assaulting the glass fronts of Lovely Avenue, ripping and rewrapping mink and shiny silver foxes for now leg warmers, the family bag of sapphire and cracked emeralds. Any day now, the year of the diamond dogs, and I could be a diamond dog if I wanted when I grow up. Daddy said so.
Well, there was some relevance to that, believe it or not, because recently there have been reports of rats the size of cats. And although, as far as I know, no one's ever seen 10,000 peoploids, rats the size of cats have been reported, especially in Britain's sewers. And so, I have my old friend Richard Freeman and I are going to talk about giant rats and see what comes up. Third time lucky. Richard, before we get on to the subject of giant rats in the sewers, I think we ought to actually have a brief look at the long and noble history in Fortiana of stories of other peculiar out-of-place creatures living in the sewers.
There have been urban legends of American alligators living in the sewers of New York, at least since the 1920s. And an alligator was captured in the sewers in New York, but there are no populations of them living down there because it's far too cold, and also they need to bask in sunlight. So alligators wouldn't survive in the sewers for very long.
I remember being told when I was a boy that there were alligators living in the sewers of Hong Kong. And I said, well, there couldn't be American alligators, there'd be the Chinese alligator, and that's not found anywhere near this part of China. And I went on to explain how it was found right up in the Yangtze-Kiang River complex, and whoever the children were who told me about this got bored and wandered off.
The saltwater crocodile used to live in Hong Kong.
Oh yes, it's still, it depends, the one that was caught in, I think it was 1998, something like that. I know it was over 20 years ago. It was caught in Deep Bay marshes, where it had been reported for quite a few weeks or even months before a local hunter managed to go out and capture it. And it's now living in the Maipo Visitors Centre, where it's a very popular attraction. And although the odds are it was a escape pet. The fact that Hong Kong traditionally has always been within the range of the saltwater crocodile makes it certainly possible, if not probable, that it is a naturally occurring wild saltwater crocodile that should have been there in the first place. How far else do they go, Rich?
They have been recorded off the semi-tropical islands on the southern coast of Japan, and there was a German traveller in Japan who wrote about seeing sacred dragons kept in a temple, and his description of them sounded like saltwater crocodiles. And they're supposed to occasionally reach the waters around New Zealand, and some of the so-called mosasaur sightings and the Maori traditions of Tijuana, which is a sort of water dragon, may have something to do with out-of-place saltwater crocodiles.
There's also a possibility, isn't there, that some of the Chinese dragon stories are based on both sightings, rare sightings of saltwater crocodiles, and what might have happened when the Chinese exploration fleets reached as far down as eastern Australia.
Yes. The Chinese had they actually called the saltwater crocodile the flood dragon, possibly because it came into contact with human habitation when floods washed it into villages and towns. But there was one record of proclamations being read to them as if they could understand them, because they thought that they were celestial creatures.
And what about the reports from that appear to have come back from Australia about living dragons?
Well, that could have been early Chinese explorers meeting with saltwater crocodiles, which can reach 30 feet or more in length, and intriguingly it could be a case of late surviving Varanus priscus, the giant Australian monitor that used to be called Megalania prisca, but they changed the name. It's still, in common parlance, it's still called Megalania, but the scientific binomial is now Varanus priscus.
Well, I don't know about you, I usually get annoyed when they change the name, but I think changing the name of the largest monitor lizard that ever lived to being in the same family as the rest of the monitors is actually really rather cool.
And the remains of a particularly massive one were found in the grounds of a secondary school in Adelaide not so long ago, and they identified it as a school monitor.
Oh, well, in the same way as the one that was found, the massive one that was found inside the grounds of a dairy farm was reported as being a milk monitor. But what other animals have been reported from sewers? I know my favourite.
There was I can't remember whereabouts in Spain it was, but there was a story a few years ago of a monster in a sewer in Spain, and they put a camera down, I think, to look for it, and it was this sort of leech or eel-like creature about 4 metres long, and it had sort of a mouth at one end that opened up like that. And in the end what they found it was a length of horse intestine that had been washed into the sewers and then filled up with human shit, like some sort of demonic sausage.
Well, that's particularly cool, especially in light of the fact that the name I can't pronounce of the Mongolian death worm means intestine worm, doesn't it?
Alroy hoi hoi, yeah.
My favourite are the wild boars in the sewers.
Oh, the Victorian black sewer pigs. which almost certainly did not exist.
Well, I got them from one of my favourite children's authors, who's Jon Aiken, who also wrote some very good books for adults as well, which if you want to find out about both her children's books and her adult books, a large chunk of them are available for free on the Internet Archive, so I would recommend you check that out. Aiken, Aitken. And in one of her standalone alternative history novels, which was set in an alternate 17th century where James II had not been forced off the throne, and so the Hanoverian Revolution never happened. Neither the Hanoverian Revolution or the Glorious Revolution ever happened. And so, in this really rather cool story, which is called Midnight is a Place, you saw that as on TV.
Yeah, it was a children's show in the 70s.
I've got it on DVD if you want to borrow it.
Oh yeah, I remember virtually nothing about it.
It's absolutely smashing. It's not as good as the book, but nothing ever is, are they?
Very seldom. Jaws is better than the book. The film Jaws is better than the book. Lair of the White Worm is better than the book, but they're the exceptions that prove the rule.
Well, Bram Stoker wasn't a terribly good writer.
Lair of the White Worm is a great concept, much more frightening than Dracula, but it's just dreadfully executed.
Yes, Dracula's a great concept, but I think his original writing has been eclipsed by copyists and fanboys and fangirls. But Jon Aiken, her two juvenile, what are they called? Protagonists. Her two protagonists, who are two children aged about 14 and about 9, encounter a town full of weird, nasty stuff at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, which they've actually brought the Industrial Revolution. She brought the Industrial Revolution back about 100 years, so that doesn't really matter. And the boy has to go and work as an assistant to somebody called a tosher, who was somebody who used to venture into the labyrinthine sewers below this town of Lastburn and look for hidden treasures that had fallen into the sewers. And whilst the young man, the protagonist called Lucas, follows this fellow through this ever more creepy fellow through the sewers looking for treasure, they are confronted by a wild herd of, what's the collective term for a wild boar? Pod, isn't it?
A sounder.
Okay, well, sounders. So the idea of there being a sinister and wild sounder of mysterious giant pigs living in the sewers, I think that's a great story. And that turned me on to the idea that it was possible that wild pigs might once have lived in British sewers. But Richard, tell me, what's the Victorian pig hoax?
Oh, it was said that when they were building the sewers, a pregnant sow wandered in and gave birth, and her and her piglets survived and fed on the sewage, and it became a great huge sounder of vicious, huge black Victorian sewer pigs. In fact, it would need a good deal of them to make a viable population. One pregnant sow on her own couldn't do it, and there's never been any evidence for it. It was just an urban legend. I can't remember where it had its genesis, but it's just an urban legend.
Well, stuff like that fascinates me. And in recent years, there's been a whole string of stories about rats supposedly reaching an immense size and being found in sewers in Britain, in America, and even in Iran. I showed you some of the pictures, and you said it was false perspective.
False perspective when something is held in front of the person and towards the camera, making it look bigger in relationship with the person. The most famous being the solifugids that were dangled in front of a camera in the Iraq War, making them look like the size of dinner plates when really they were only about like that.
Well, my brother believed in those.
Mm.
He sent the pictures of what we have to deal with out here.
None of them have ever been anything like that big.
No, of
They're
course
just
not.
dangled in front of the camera.
Solifugids are camel spiders, aren't they?
Yes, also known as wind scorpions, although they're not spiders or scorpions.
The only time I've ever seen wild live ones, in fact, I can say the time I've ever seen them at all. I don't think that if they've been taken into captivity up there in culture, I've never heard of them. Have you?
I saw one in Tajikistan.
Yeah, I saw them when I saw them in Illinois. I saw half a dozen of them. But now, I want to do an experiment in forced perspective here. Can you please take Peanut and make him into a giant forced perspective to cat?
I'm not sure he'll like being disturbed. He's asleep.
He's always asleep.
No, Peanut.
He'll go back to sleep on you anyway afterwards.
Hang on, Peanut. Whoa. No, he's gone.
Oh well, that was a try, wasn't it?
I have Peanut. Arch. No. Let's see what we can do with Peanut.
He looks like the giant cat with the goodies.
Twinkle.
Was that?
Kitten Kong was called Twinkle. Yeah.
I remember seeing it. I don't remember it being called Twinkle. But is it feasible that giant rats could grow in the sewers?
Well, there was a rat shot in the sewers of Victorian London that was the size of a grizzly bear. It took a Chinese fowling piece to bring it down. But that was the result of experiments in cellular expansion by Magnus Greel, a criminal from the 31st century who had travelled back in time and was posing as the Chinese god Wang Chiang.
Okay, outside the Whoverse, is it the Whoverse or the Hooniverse?
The Hooniverse.
Outside the Hooniverse, in the real world, or what passes for the real world, do you think there's any chance that rats could grow to a huge size? I mean, not the size of a grizzly bear, but...
Well, where there is plenty of food and a lack of disturbance and a lack of predators, you will get population explosions and you will get individuals that are very much bigger than the norm. And if these individuals survive and breed, you'll get bigger and bigger individuals.
So, these stories of giant rats, although the evidence seems to have been completely fabricated, could basically be true.
There's no reason why the brown rat, the Norway rat, couldn't get much bigger. I mean, I've heard stories of them being the size of rabbits and cats and things, and it's certainly feasible. There's no biological or morphological reason they shouldn't get to the size of a small dog or a cat. And some of these stories may be based on escaped Gambian pouch rats. I've seen those in the wild and they're very much bigger than the ordinary rat.
There's one here from New York a few years ago of what appears to be a Gambian pouch rat that was offed by some idiot with a garden fork, but that looks like a gambling pouch rat rather than a giant sewer rat. But is there any are there any other records of normally medium-sized or small-sized creatures growing particularly larger than they should do?
You get outsized animals in all sorts of species, particularly reptiles. There are Nile crocodiles and saltwater crocodiles, both of which average about 15 feet long, but you get much, much, much bigger ones, gigantic ones, 28 feet plus. Same with pythons and anacondas. You get freak individuals that are absolutely enormous.
Well, we've established that, like in the song Archie quoted at the beginning of the show, that there can, or at least could be, rats the size of cats. What about cats the size of dogs?
Now, this is confirmed. In Australia, the feral cat population is utterly out of control and they're a bloody menace. They're wiping out populations of birds and small mammals, and they're also growing to fantastically large sizes. A few years ago, there was one shot by a man who thought he was shooting a panther, and he measured this thing, and there's a photograph of him holding it up by the tail, and it's about 5 feet long. It's the size of a small puma, and he buried it, but later he went back and got the tail and sent the tail away to laboratories for genetic analysis, and it was 100% feral domestic cat. And there are a number of these stories of immensely big feral cats. And I remember on Carl Schuker's blog once, he reprinted a letter sent to him by a gypsy girl, and this was in Britain, about a gigantic feral cat, and it fought one of their dogs, and the two animals basically tore each other up, and the dog had to be shot in the end, and I think the cat was killed with a hammer, but it was enormous. It was the size of a good-sized dog. It was, and I think it was fighting against a bull terrier, and it was at least as large as the bull terrier.
What would cause these outsized cats? I'm carefully trying not to say big cats, because big cats means something completely different.
Yeah, well, we're not talking about panthers or pumas. We're talking about some kind of genetic quirk in feral domestics that makes them grow very big under certain circumstances. In Australia, it could be the lack of large terrestrial carnivorous marsupials on the mainland. So over most of Australia, they've got very little competition and lots of prey.
Yeah, but if you think of it, people with house cats, which is the same species, I know some people who ridiculously overfeed their house cats, and they just get fatter, have heart attacks and die. They've got unlimited food.
But these things are having to hunt for their prey, so they're keeping trim because they have to hunt. There must be something in the environment that favours large body size. So it could be like Stephen Jay Gould's punctuated equilibrium, where evolution happens very fast. It could be a snapshot of that.
Could it also be because most of the mammals, not all, but most of the mammals in Australia are either monotremes or marsupials? Could it be that there is something chemical within the bodies of marsupials which isn't found within the bodies of placental mammals, and this chemical, which comes from eating donuts and quolls and antikinuses and things, could somehow trigger enormous growth.
Well, I've no idea. I've never heard of that theory before. I don't know if anybody's ever even looked into it. But it wouldn't explain the giant feral from Britain.
No, and it's not really a theory. It's something I just came up with out of the air there. So, boys and girls, and Archie, we have answered your questions. Yes, there are rats the size of cats, and yes, there are cats the size of dogs, and there are probably 10,000 peoploids doing something strange with a family badge of sapphire and cracked emerald, but that's mostly outside the remit of this show. I want to say a very big thank you to Richard Freeman, my old friend and sparring partner, for one happy Saturday afternoon, early July, sitting down and talking cryptozoological nonsense with me. I'll be back on Saturday. Be seeing you.